with Alan Juddy, and this is another episode of Seed Dating, the podcast where you get to meet one of Agricom's forage products, learn about its attributes, and match it to your farm system. And here to help to nurture your new blossoming relationship is our very own forage relationship expert, Alistair Moorhead. Hi, Al, and who are we going to meet today?
Well, regarding forage, we're not going to meet anyone today, Juddy.
Oh, have we been stood up? Have we been ghosted?
No, Juddy, we're going to be talking about seed coating, protecting the seed during establishment.
Oh, so we're getting some protection against not being stood up when we put seed in the ground.
Yeah, Juddy. Protecting what's on the inside of the seed by putting something on the outside.
Oh, poetic. That's lovely, Al. So broadly, what is seed coating?
Juddy, it's a film of chemical, either fungicides or pesticides, placed on the outside of the seed.
Right. Well, today in our date, we have three people. And I want to introduce Fraser Harrison, our forage systems expert, and he's going to be here to help us unpack this topic. Welcome, Fraser.
Cheers, Juddy.
Discussing seed coating, so we're going to actually ask the first question is, what topic are we covering today as far as seed coating? And it's to do with summer cropping and particularly brassica and herbs, but particularly brassica cropping. And the context I'm going to set is that this topic is extremely valuable. When people commit to a cost structure associated with summer crop, they're talking about having a forage that's at an expected yield parameter by the middle of a very stressful time of year, which is summer. We're leaving a springtime and heading into the hot and dry summer phase. And again, like I say, we're trying to feed animals highly nutritious feed that is also very, very safe on average. So it's a really important investment. And I suppose, Fraser, that's how we pass off to you. And with all your experience when you're working on farms across the country and a wide range of styles of farms, how do you see seed coating as a tool for farmers?
Well, I think you've outlined, Al, around how valuable a crop can be in the long term. So I think given the fact that we can see some pretty variable paddocks, etc., seed beds, protecting that seed so it gets the best chance is hugely important. They are high value crops. It's a plant numbers game. So if we lose plant numbers, that limits our yield and performance for that crop going forward. So I see it as a really, really important insurance policy.
Yeah, absolutely.
And is it I guess some people talk about the silver bullet and saying, well, if you coat seed, then that's all you need to do. Is that the way you see it?
Absolutely not. I think it's a really useful tool in our toolbox to help us get to a really successful crop, but it should be used in conjunction with good crop husbandry as well. So I think regularly monitoring your crops is a really, really important thing to do. Seed treatment typically lasts and depending on the type of seed treatment we choose to go for, typically lasts about 6 weeks. So while it can offer some good protection in that time frame, it's not gonna last the whole length of your crop system.
And for me, that's quite a big point, is that when you're talking 6 weeks, often your establishment conditions defines how big a crop is and how fast it continues to grow. And the risk profile is when things start establish right out of the ground. Like that is the single biggest moment, is the part when you really are only seeing the first cotyledon emerge out of the soil, is one of the single biggest risks timeframes. However, your immediate growing conditions defines for how long your crop stays small. And the smaller you are, as you get closer and closer to that 6 weeks, the more vulnerable you are to other things still going on.
Yeah, and there's a number of things that have an effect on that. Sowing depth is one of them, climatic conditions, etc. So I think when the variables add up, seed treatment's a tool that you can use to help ensure that you do get a crop.
Because again, the longer you stay small, the more vulnerable you are to small insects. And I think the other proviso with seed treatment is that the recognition that as climates change, seasons warm, winters warm, we are seeing pest buildups like, I wouldn't say ever before. They have been around for decades and decades, big cycles of pests. But we experience a time again where even seed treatment seed coatings are unlikely to protect from death by 1,000 cuts, which is what we often experience with these huge pest pressures, which means that you have to be onto your paddocks, value them enough to go out and pay attention to what's going on as well.
Yeah, and if you think about the time where I guess your paddocks are most threatened by insects, you look spring through to autumn, that's when the insects are probably the most active. So I guess we're planting our crops in the spring. We're wanting them to get going as we get into summer. These insects are pretty active, and we probably need to protect it against them.
So we are still looking at a couple of products we're profiling today. One of them is Ultrastrike and the other one is Gaucho. They're two seed products that have been used widely in Australasia over the years. And, we'll talk about Ultrastrike as a starting point because there's two styles. One has multiple functions and the other is relatively simplistic. What are we talking about in the Ultrastrike category from a seed treatment for brassica perspective?
Yeah, so Ultrastrike's more your Rolls Royce. If you wanted the gold standard in terms of insect fungicide protection, it basically gives your crop your best chance of getting out of the ground. The insecticide in it's a systemic insecticide, so that gets taken up by the plant as it germinates, so that gives good protection in that instance. Some people look at the cost of it and get shied off by it, but you think, say, $60 a hectare, if that's going to guarantee you X number of kgs of dry matter, it's actually quite a small investment relative to the value of that crop at
Correct.
The back end.
Most people budget on, depending on whether it's a one graze crop or a multiple graze crop, but you could, consistently budget in an early to midsummer phase of producing between 8 and 12 tonnes of dry matter, depending on how well you start, how much you can accumulate, or how many regrowth cycles you get. And so the figures we typically budget on is having highly nutritious, safe feed at between 8 and 12 tonnes of dry matter with a really genuinely good average of about 10 tonne before the crop is finished. I think that would be a fair call with your experience.
That'd be a really fair call. And I guess just dive into a little bit of the detail of what Ultrastrike can give you. We can protect against our springtails, which can be really damaging at that small establishing stage. Your Nicias, they're the same kettle of fish.
Which is also called wheat bug. Yep.
Yeah. That can be quite damaging in those early stages of crop development. So really important. And aphids and then Argentine stem weevil as well. So those are your main insects. And what I would say is that the beauty of seed treatment is it's there at the day of sowing. So if you have these insects turn up, that controls them really well.
Yeah.
Whereas if you're relying on seeing those insects causing damage in the paddock, they've caused damage before you've even acknowledged that
they're
they're
actually literally suffering from plant number loss by the time you start looking and start scratching it even into the ground to find it. The fungicide component?
Yeah, so I guess this is something that is really helpful. Protects against our in-soil pathogens, protects against diseases like dampening off, and bits and pieces that I think sometimes we undervalue. Yeah. Sometimes we look at these diseases and blame them quite easily on a Nicias or blame them on a bit of wind damage when actually they're potentially a soil-borne fungus that has actually implicated that crop at the establishment phase.
And I do think it's important to realise that, one of the roles of summer cropping is that you're harvesting saved moisture from the spring into the drying phase of the summer. And by definition, what that means is that in the ideal world, you'll be sowing into wetter conditions. And depending on the soil types you are, that wetter soil at the start of the sowing process, if you're lucky, by the way, will be steamy, will be hot, and depending on the soil type, the vulnerability of actually going through a less than desirable wet phase is quite high at the very start of the process.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it comes back to when those insects are really starting to get really active, aren't they?
And often that's why also things start slowly as well. Wet and cool would be the starting point, and before we go dry and hot.
And I say the other product that we were talking about today is Gaucho. Give us a feel for where that differs from Ultrastrike.
Yep. So Ultrastrike and Gaucho, there is Gaucho in Ultrastrike. So again, that's systemic insecticide that protects against those exact same insects that Ultrastrike does. But there is a concentration difference in the seed treatment. So you get nearly double in Ultrastrike what you would get with straight Gaucho. So if you think about that from a effectiveness point of view, a control point of view, Ultrastrike definitely has a better insect protection as well as the fungicide than straight Gaucho. A lot of Gaucho gets used, but what I would say is, back to your point before, Juddy, it's not a silver bullet, and it definitely requires more crop monitoring with the Gaucho treatment only, as opposed to going for the Ultrastrike.
Now, just also looking at the fact that we've used the words fungicides and insecticides, one of the strengths of seed treatment is it's a minute amount of these chemicals in the landscape. It's environmentally, some people definitely could take the position that no insecticides or fungicides are appropriate in the landscape. This is one way of managing things in a very less intense way. And so what we're discussing here is, in real terms, minute amounts of insecticides and fungicides placed in the only place that matters, which is around the seed and the plant that's about to develop. And I feel it's a really interesting discussion how just when we discuss use of pesticides and things, everyone freaks out. But the reality is this type of seed coating is certainly what I describe as one of the more low impact environmental styles of fungicide and pesticide use we can actually come up with. Also reasonably and genuinely safe for handling in general terms if all the rules are followed. So it's a pretty complete package from that perspective.
Yeah. And I see, taking a wider view of this, if we had a tractor, which is worth, $500,000, we'd certainly take out an insurance policy on that to make sure that, if anything happened to it, that we could replace that. And I guess if you're thinking about particularly winter feed, and that from a farm systems point of view, having to, if you lost, 3 tons on a winter crop, having to replace that with bought-in feed is hugely expensive.
Massive.
And therefore, for the insurance policy, if you like, or potentially it's more than an insurance policy, because there will be some insects there, and so really taking that protection against those using that, I think is makes a whole lot of sense.
Yeah, you make a really interesting point there, Juddy. We do a lot of trials in this space as well, and there's a number of examples where we could rattle off here, but one springs to mind in a kale crop where simply due to plant numbers, our untreated treatments grew 8 tonne of dry matter, for a winter grazing, and our Ultrastrike treated treatments grew 16 tonnes. So if you think about that, yes, that's not going to happen every time, but if you get an insect attack or a disease event, and you miss the opportunity to control those insects, that can have a pretty significant yield.
And I feel that's a really nice description, is that, again, we've been in this game for a very, very long time, supporting farmers growing healthy, productive crops. And we know that you don't always have the perfect storm whenever you're trying to demonstrate these things. So our trialling lives, we've run many trials without results, because you really do require the perfect storm to have the failures, to have the big crop losses. The reality is they are real. And that's the point, is it's rolling the dice saying, oh, but I don't have this problem, I don't have this problem, I don't have this problem. And then all of a sudden you do. And the issue is the scale of when it goes bad is quite significant. And in my humble opinion, this is the key, is that you can actually not appreciate this insurance and therefore not pay for it, but actually one day it comes and then it hurts, and then the sheer scale of the value of what you were trying to achieve comes back and hits you really hard when you have to go and, like pay cash to actually get extra grazing, pay cash to bring in outside feeds from the crop that failed because you didn't cover yourself with a bit of insurance at the start.
Ding. Well, it's been very interesting, a lovely journey through how and why we'd use seed coating. And today I'm identifying as a kale grower, actually, and so it makes a lot of sense to coat my seed, and I'm pretty excited to be swiping right on that one. You've been listening to another episode of Seed Dating with Al and Juddy. Hope you can catch another episode soon.